It's an absolute pleasure to be here. I'm Adam Rappaport, as Paul has explained. I am by day a AI solution specialist for Data3, and I'll explain a little more about them and my role there. I'm also, as Paul mentioned, co-founder and research analyst by night with the team at GAI Insights, and I am a tech wizard all the time. Paul, I have my other screen up, so if there are questions or if there are hands up, you can help me moderate and call on people, or if there's a question in the chat, that'd be fantastic. Thank you. So I'm actually, this is a reproduction of a presentation I did at JuiceIT with a colleague. And Data3's JuiceIT, there's a little shot of me up on stage with my colleague Mark Patty, is our equivalent of GAI World. We actually travel to all of the capital cities, so Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide, Canberra, Perth. And we have Microsoft and Cisco as our sponsors for the event. So this is our big annual event, and I had the privilege of presenting about how you actually start this AI journey, because for a lot of customers, they're just looking. We just started a new financial year and they've got budget, but they aren't even sure where to begin, but they know they're getting further and further behind the 8 ball. So you can see quite a few big names there. We basically are the largest partner of Microsoft and Cisco in Australia, and do a lot of business driving things like Microsoft Copilot, but also we're looking now at Cisco AI pods and how we do things like Azure Cloud into Azure Local at the data center for people who want to do their inference locally on their own data and those sorts of things. Data3 has a lot of Copilot experience. We were actually customer zero, meaning that we were part of the early access program. So it's been almost 2 years now that we've been using Copilot, learning from our own adoption of it and then taking that out into market. We've done 100+ Copilot projects for customers, and we have quite a breadth of knowledge within that space. Just to give you a sense of what we have here, so just in terms of our capabilities, we have specialists within M365 Copilot adoption and change management specifically, a Copilot Studio expert in the Biz Apps practice, an Azure AI Foundry expert for the Azure side of things, as well as myself and the rest of the team from Modern Work and Biz Apps through consulting and the practice itself. So this presentation, as I said, is a reproduction of what I did at JuiceIT. And at Juice, we had 40 minutes. I'm probably already 5 minutes into the half hour I have. So if I'm speaking a little fast and skipping over some details, it's just to try and fit it all into the time and leave a little time for Q&A. So look, AI is everywhere. This is a video I made specifically for Juice. And it's just to convey that idea that, like, no matter where we go, we're just completely surrounded by AI these days. And it's hard not to notice, right? Everything from some of the major apps that might be already on our phone to the apps we already see within our enterprise. You know, it's here, and it's a question of where do we start and how do we adopt it. One thing we've learned along the way, this is actually a survey I first discovered by doing the news show every day. There was a survey from Software AG about companies that are looking to adopt enterprise AI, and at companies that don't even have an enterprise policy or an enterprise solution, 75% of the 6,000 people surveyed said they're already using AI tools, and almost half of them said they wouldn't give up using these tools even if they were prohibited. They would risk their job, which is just a really, really huge indication of how what an impact it's having on people's ability to get their work done. So really the message is blanket bans fail. This is from VentureBeat, where they published that article, and that you need to find ways to deliver legitimate AI apps fast to your employees. So our recommendation is be like SpaceX, not NASA. So if we forget for a minute about the individual and the politics associated with him, there's a lot we can learn actually from SpaceX and how it parallels here, right? You have to have an agile mindset. NASA says, let's go slow, let's get it right the first time, and they build these giant monolithic projects, whereas SpaceX is all about moving fast, learn, and iterating. And AI is evolving at an exponential rate. And if we take even 6 months or a year to do a project, it's already going to be obsolete by the time we can get it out there. So you really just need to start with small-scale AI pilots and take a launch and learn approach. Which brings us to the journey of 1,000 miles, right? Which always starts with that first step. So in this presentation, I'm going to be reviewing organizationally, how do we prepare and prioritize? And then per use case or per solution, how do we take it from concept through to production? And I'll actually be sharing a use case of how we did this using Azure AI for one of our customers. So where do we begin? We have to prepare, right? And a lot of that's education around how do we manage AI, right? Governance isn't just an IT responsibility. It requires leadership, requires buy-in from cross-functional teams, And for a lot of people, if you even just ask who owns AI in your organization, it isn't necessarily so clear. Secondly, we have to understand what should and shouldn't users do. Um, are users even aware that what data they're feeding into these tools and where it's going? It's important to start beginning that educational process. And then lastly, what problems should we solve? AI is not always the right one-size-fits-all solution. So you need some sort of process around how do we identify, select, and prioritize use cases. Workshop that we actually do with customers is effectively a day in the life. We actually go out to the specific individuals in the business units and help them understand as they go through their day, where are those places where AI could be fit into their workflow to help streamline and optimize. We identify what are the various challenges and opportunities that those use cases present. But then lastly, what we do is we recommend people squirrel away all of these great ideas, because even if they can't use them right now, it's quite possible in 3 months or even 6 months, what seemed either cost ineffective or technically unfeasible now might be something very easy to do as the technology adapts. So just because something's a good idea, but not a good idea now, it doesn't mean you shouldn't hang on to it. And then it seems a little bit backwards, but then based on all of that, we actually recommend then you identify what your vision is for rolling this out and what the strategic priorities are. So as you go to prioritize, there's a few things you should ask, like not just should we, but can we? And then what is the value, but also what is the effort involved? And in that workshop, we actually work with organizations to identify use cases, but then also apply our own lens of expertise in terms of how easy or difficult would these be to implement. So for example, which we present at the end of the workshop when we return back to them, is an HR agent might be something that's not only super high value, but easy to implement with something like Copilot Studio, where maybe you just give it the knowledge about your HR policies, and then all of a sudden the HR staff is spending less time answering routine questions from their employees. It's really common use case, but to understand that compared to a travel agent, for example, they might both be high value, not necessarily one higher than the other, but something that's integrating with third-party systems might be a little more difficult to implement. You might not want to start there in terms of trying to get wins on the board. So we then go through this whole exercise, we map them all out, and then based on that, we start to identify where are the good places to start this journey. What are those high value, easy to implement use cases that can get some wins on the board and start getting your organization value out of AI today? Well, in the very near future at first. This actually brings us to the case study. So then per use case, we actually go through the process of, well, we have this idea like an HR agent, right? Or in this case, for Brisbane Catholic Education, they actually had a really big problem and they came to us. So the situation at Brisbane Catholic Education, they're a diocese with almost 150 schools up in Queensland, and they have 15 million scanned student records. This is all historical records. So these are confirmation of enrollment forms, media consent forms, that sorts of thing. But they don't have any metadata on these PDFs. So if they go to SharePoint and they search for a student ID, they won't find that student's records. And given the scale, it would take almost 30 years at a document a minute to have someone go through and look at all of these and find that metadata and extract them. It's just not a feasible manual solution. And even some of the existing OCR solutions, like Document Intelligence, which we'll talk about in this presentation, it's just not cost effective given the licensing and the model for the scale of something like 15 million documents. So we had this concept. Well, this was back when GPT Turbo Vision had just come out. And we said, oh, there's an AI model now that has vision. What if we took these PDFs and we converted them into JPEGs and we just gave them to AI and just asked it to look at them? Would it be as effective? Could it do as good a job? What would the cost be? We had no idea. But that's where you have to start, is you have this idea and you have to then go actually evaluate it and build a prototype. So we said, yeah, let's have the robot do it. That seemed like a great idea. So when you have a concept like this, there are various components. There's going to be the data, there's what you do with the data, and then the action you take as a result of that. In our case, this was the PDFs on SharePoint. The processing would be the actual extraction of that metadata. And then the action was tagging that data back to the PDFs on SharePoint. So in the future, people could search and actually find those student records when they're looking for them. Great idea, but how's it actually going to work? As you move into the prototype phase, you have some options, right? There's things that are ready to use off the shelf. There's customizable solutions. And then there's build your own. In this case, we knew there were ready to use and customizable solutions. The problem was really around the cost associated with them. So we wanted to see if we built our own solution using this new technology, how would it stack up? Would it do as good a job, and would it be cost effective? So that's really where we started on this journey with them, was just around that idea of, in the prototype, you have to build it, test it, and then iterate. It's the SpaceX approach, right? So in phase one of this project, really the idea was, let's not bite off a big chunk of professional services dollars or overcommit to something. Let's just do a first stage with a decision gate where we just validate the capability and the accuracy of the solution. So we actually compared document intelligence, which is the standard sort of machine learning text extraction, against the GPT-4o Turbo Vision, which would be taking the images and just giving them to AI and asking them what's in it. And I think actually I will do this demo. I'll stop sharing and turn the sound on and let this play. I'll come right back with sound on so you can understand how this actually works.
Let's go mine some metadata. In this demo, I'm going to be doing an overview of the first half of this solution for the BCE proof of concept. We'll be looking at the document intelligence solution workflow. So, we'll be starting with a PDF in SharePoint. The data from that PDF will be parsed by document intelligence. The extracted text will be passed to GPT to extract the metadata. And then that extracted metadata will be written back to the PDF. Let's hop on in and take a look at how this works. So here you can see our test SharePoint directory with some documents in them. If I go ahead and click on one of these, we can see in the details this one has a check mark. It's already been scanned and we've extracted the first name, last name, and what type of document it is. So I'm just going to demo putting another document up there right now. Here's my confirmation of enrollment form. I'm going to just drop that into this folder. It's copying it up there now. And if I click on this one, you'll see it doesn't yet have that metadata tag to it. I'll show you a little bit about how that's working on the back end. So, here we are in the Logic app, and you can see the first part of the workflow is when a file is created or modified in that SharePoint directory. What it'll actually do now is go check to see if there's any new documents. It'll take that document and it'll pass it over to Document Intelligence to extract the text from it. And then it'll take that information and pass it to GPT-4 with the system prompt, asking it to find the specific metadata we're looking for within that body of text that we've just passed to it. And then it'll actually update the file properties and write those values back to the document on SharePoint. So if I come back over here now and I go look at the document, you can see already it's showing that it's been scanned and the metadata is showing up correctly. Mission accomplished.
Guess that's fireworks, not a bomb.
Yeah, definitely fireworks, Paul. Let's go with that. So let's continue on then. Super, thanks. So when you're in this evaluation phase, having built the prototype and you're looking at those things, you have to get feedback from the users. You have to consider performance, accuracy, scalability, cost modeling estimates, and then ultimately the ROI. And since we made it past that first gate, it actually turned out at that point that the cost was similar. The capability in terms of accuracy was as good. But as we were doing the project, OpenAI came out with GPT-4o and then 4o Mini. So all of a sudden, because the amazing thing about these AI tools is as they get better, the costs actually go down, as we're seeing quite a bit of these days. So although initially the solutions were about the same cost, by the time we got to the end of the project, it was 90% cheaper to use OpenAI's API to do the inference rather than the document intelligence solution. So having gotten out of that first phase, then we went on to the prototype, the cost modeling. We went from scanning 10 documents to 200 documents to make sure it could scale, and then ultimately fed all of that information into an operating model so that we could help our customer build a business case and get the approval they need to proceed beyond the POC, which gets us to production, right? So when you go to production, you're not actually done. There's still the importance to build, test, evaluate, and then iterate and maintain. So you continuously, even after you go to production, it's not that you're done, right? You need to remember to continue to work on these solutions. In the case of Brisbane Catholic Education, that's where we find ourselves now. They're moving forward with a pilot rollout to 1 school. They will evaluate and then roll out to 3 schools, iterate, evaluate again, and then ultimately do the broader, wider rollout to all 147 schools. So coming full circle then, that brings us back to the journey, right? At the organizational level, you want to prepare, get AI ready, but also identify your use cases and prioritize where you're going to start that journey. And then per journey, whether it's off the shelf all the way through a custom solution, you have to go from the idea through to production and then continue to iterate. One last case study here is the video I made at the beginning of this. It will follow that same process. That's how you bring just about anything to production, right? So I started with a concept. I started in GPT. I just said, look, at this presentation, my colleague is talking about it seems that AI is everywhere. I need a text prompt for text to image so that I can start making some pictures to go with these speaking notes. And that was sort of where I started the concept. It gave me a few ideas. I liked this one. It seemed busy enough. The idea was kind of that AI was everywhere. So then as we went into the prototype, I started to animate it and make a video out of it. It's just sort of still a rough design at that point. But as I went through a couple iterations and I started to evaluate them, I finally started to get something I landed on that I really liked. And then we see what I actually brought to production. One of the points I made was that in production, you're not done. At the first JuiceIT where I presented this, someone came up after and gave me the feedback that it was all men in the video and that there wasn't much diversity. And there's always room for improvement. So I went between then and the next one and I actually changed it so that it was a more diverse audience. So that's it. This QR code here will actually get you a copy of that presentation if you want to download it. Otherwise, that's it for how you can get started on your AI journey.
Fantastic. Thank you, Adam. If you've got questions, please raise your hand. Nice job. Adam, just to kick us off, I'm curious how you did QA on this. How did you have confidence it was getting the right student number? Did you sample it or?
Yeah, no, they had a guy at Brisbane Catholic Education, at least on the smaller scale, he went through manually and he was just evaluating. So we took documents where we already knew what the correct answers were, right? Because we know that we can just give it to it's the standard model of you need to have the samples that are part of your test set so that you already know what the answers are so you can validate whether or not it's getting the right answer. So even when we got to a larger scale, I think when we did the 200 documents, we had all those results put into a spreadsheet, and then we matched them against what we already knew the correct answers were so we could validate the accuracy.
Great.
Did you build a QC pipeline that you will maintain through, even now or into the future?
Yeah, the final solution was actually a little more expensive because it did more, but also a little more complex. And what we did finally is a combination of validation techniques. One of which was actually if we weren't confident the result, or I should say if the AI wasn't confident the result, it would use the document intelligence text, which does have a confidence rating between 0 and 1. And if the document intelligence and the vision solution got the same answer, we could be pretty confident that that was the right answer. Whereas if the vision solution got an answer and document intelligence was different, then we would actually flag it and it would go to a human to get checked and validated.
Got it. I must have missed. So I was curious about that. I know that Azure has a number of these tools available. So I was curious. And maybe you mentioned it. I just missed it. You used the Azure Vision or in the document intelligence models and kind of weighed them against each other, or kind of use them as a judge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we use the document intelligence model, which can do the OCR extraction, and then we just used the API calls with OpenAI through Azure OpenAI, and actually literally just sent the text and or the images to GPT-4 and then GPT-4o and then GPT-4o mini as to do the inference.
Very cool. Thank you.
I've got a few questions. People want to raise their hands. I've got one request to reshow the QR code.
Oh yeah, sure. I'll share that up again.
Christina, looks like Christina's raising her actual hand. Is that okay? Go ahead, Christina.
Yeah, I couldn't find the hand raise, so I just defaulted to their little gizmo that they use when you put your hand in the air. Adam, you mentioned that when you changed from one model to another, you got improved performance and lower cost. How do they plan in production to continue to identify when it's time to change the model and have a process by which they go through evaluating it, changing to the model, and checking it for hallucination and so forth?
It's a great question because the ongoing operations is an essential part of this. Our recommendation to them and to others, we're starting to build a service, which is basically we have one we call Copilot Assist, which is specifically around agents. But the idea is whether it's quarterly or semi-annually, you have to have a process in place where you go back and you say, what are we currently using? What's currently state of the art? What's it going to take for us to evaluate the new model? Fortunately, we had some experience with them of iterating and evaluating newer models along the way. So they're well positioned to say, oh, look, 3.0 has come out. Oh, that's super expensive and slow. We don't need to use it. Just looking at the cost per million tokens type of thing. But as whatever might be next after 4.0 mini comes out, they are well positioned now themselves to go through that same test process again, but just pointed at a different model on the back end. But you're absolutely right, and it's a really important point to emphasize that when you put it in production, you're not done. You do have to continue to test and evaluate and maintain these solutions. Yeah.
Great. Shantanu, did I say that correctly? Go ahead.
Yes. Hey, thanks, Adam, for the talk. I think so. Azure AI also has like features in the space, and ChatGPT that you mentioned, hosted on Azure, is one of the routes to test solutions in the space. Question for you though, model updating is a perennial exercise, right? Like that's something I'm sure you would be doing it. How do you put guardrails around, say PII for students and so forth, right? Like how do you make sure that any entity which is getting access to that's well covered and so forth? Was that a consideration, or curious to hear your thoughts?
Yeah, and that's a great question, and that's precisely why we went with the solution, because it is sensitive information when you're talking about students. And the Brisbane Catholic Education, because they're a Microsoft shop, because they're already have their data in SharePoint, their Azure tenant is a secure environment for them. Like they say, what do they say? Don't I don't know what the expression is, but basically, like they've already committed to trusting Microsoft as a secure place for their personally identified information. So we're ensuring that this is staying in their tenant within Azure, and so as a result, there's no data at rest that's being traversed to anywhere else that could put it at risk.
Great. Good. Go ahead, Shannon. Thanks for raising your hand, Shannon.
Hey, Sharon.
Piggybacking on Christina, it's good to see you, Adam. Great presentation. Piggybacking on Christina's question, how do you, when the underlying model changes, how do you ensure the continued fidelity of your solution?
So the underlying model doesn't change. We have that coded into the solution. So we have to change the underlying model. So there's no risk that all of a sudden they'll be using it and it will stop working. And that's one of the problems with OpenAI and ChatGPT. Like Paul can attest to this. We have some solutions that we use internally, and poor Luda, with this newsletter, like we have this great solution with a custom GPT where it's working along fine, and then OpenAI changes what's happening under the hood, and all of a sudden things aren't working anymore the way they used to. So when you're building the solution and you're configuring which model it's using, you have control over that. So what they do is in the test environment, they validate the new model, they validate the accuracy, and then they push that new model to production.
Got it. Okay,
It's
thank you.
sort of like if you're on version 3 of someone's software and version 4 comes out, hopefully in your enterprise, they don't just push that to production on you. You take it through a test and validation process before you deploy it yourselves.
Got it. Thank you.
Adam, what's the biggest thing you learned is implementation?
Well, Paul, I mean, honestly, it's the thing that we already know, which is that final step of getting into production is really the hardest part.
Last
Like,
mile.
you know, Brisbane Catholic Education, they got this far, they did all of this work, all of this eval, they're ready to pilot it. Now their board of directors is saying, well, let's look at record point and purview again. Let's be sure that building our own solution is really the best thing to do here. And they still haven't rolled it out.
No. Well, great. Well, Adam, any last minute questions for Adam, and then we'll go to open mic. So great. Well, thank you, Adam. Fabulous presentation.
You're welcome. Absolute pleasure.
Actually, I think there might have been a question I missed. Hang on here, Adam, on the QR code. I missed something in the chat. So one question, when you find issues, Adam, how do you fix them, and how do you measure the error rate?
That's that iterative process. There's no smoking gun there, right? You literally have to just test and validate and test and validate and continue to iterate. Sometimes it's changing the prompt. Sometimes it's understanding that there was actually a defect in how something was getting passed or stored, but mostly it's around the prompt engineering at that point and making sure you're being really clear and explicit with the model about what sort of output you want and what format.
Great. We'll go to Christina, then Tim. Go ahead, Christina.
Adam, you do a lot of these projects and you've been doing consulting long before AI came out. What is the leadership skill that you find most valuable in working with executives on adopting AI and putting it in production?
You mean the leadership skill I have to have or that they have to
Yes.
have?
Well, you can comment on both. I was more thinking of you, but if you have some commentary on both, that would be
helpful. I think for me, it's probably being able to understand where the fear lies, where the risks are. Speaking to an executive, I mean, I'm obviously a builder and I like to get my hands on the tools, but often you have to speak in terms of risk and compliance when you're dealing with executives, and to be able to give them the opportunity to express what their challenges are, to express what it is that's potentially the obstacles for them, because they're often not technical in any way, like for example here with BCE not being able to roll this to production. So being able to create, I guess, a relationship and an environment where you can get the candid feedback you need to really know what's stopping these things from moving forward. Go ahead, Tim.
Hey, Adam, great presentation. I was just not attentive enough. I wanted to know what tool you were using there at the end for the animation and the slide presentation stuff that you did.
Oh, no, I didn't actually say. I didn't actually say.
I feel better. I just missed it because I was not attentive enough.
And it was actually funny. At one of the JuiceITs, someone in the audience was like, well, what tool did you use? And I said, well, actually, I think I used 5 different tools. And they said, okay, well, what 5 tools? And I was like, okay, here we go. So, I mean, I used ChatGPT, I used Runway, I used 11 Labs, a lot of the usual
suspects.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, okay. Thanks. Great stuff.
Thanks.
Well, fabulous. Thank you, Adam. Great presentation. Last 5 or 10 minutes with the open mic. This is where people can share something they're learning or ask questions or tell a joke. Go ahead, David.
I just wanted to say that in terms of the infographic, something that can be helpful is you can ask for it to do an SVG and HTML format, and that can not only be hand edited, but you can paste it directly into Adobe Illustrator. And I did that in parallel with the meeting and paste it into the chat if anyone wants to take,
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah, that's cool.
I don't know if the SVG, you put that in Adobe Acrobat and you can change.
Well, Adobe Illustrator is a full, I
Illustrator.
mean, I personally, I hate Acrobat for editing. I find it almost unusable, but other people disagree. But yeah, you can paste it into Adobe Illustrator. So if you look at it in Canvas, in ChatGPT, you see the whole thing. You can ask it to edit pieces. You can hand edit pieces.
Yeah.
Then you can just grab the SVG and put it into Adobe Illustrator, but it's bi-directional. You can take Adobe Illustrator stuff that you've made and grab it, and it'll come in as you can actually, anyway, you can go back and forth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good. Yeah. And Adam, I really appreciate what you taught me tonight about that little edit button. I didn't.
Yeah, I didn't know that either. Thank you, Adam. Yeah.
Go ahead, Mark.
We did our first lunch and learn all about agents this week, and we had 40 people show up. They sent the whole HR department to see how it's done. So like the rocket has taken off.
That's fantastic. Congratulations, Mark.
Thanks.
Well, what's your biggest fear now that everyone's getting excited about it?
Who, me?
Yeah.
Make sure they do it right, working on the process documents and videos to show them how to get started, because we're getting people asking questions now.
That's fantastic. That's great. We're John Spielkla, who's on, and we're working with 4 or 5 companies on executive training and Gen AI, and we're seeing the same thing, Mark. You start that ball rolling a little bit, and it just starts picking up, and people are popping, and groups are forming, and it's really it's quite exciting. Yeah. And we're seeing at least probably 5, 6 companies we know are all going to enterprise or Teams, ChatGPT, or considering now moving away from Copilot to things. I know you guys are staying on Copilot, but it's there's something to be a mix out there. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll see.
Well, great. Others, who's found something that really impressed them in the last 2 weeks? David, Benjamin.
So Paul, I had a question. I don't know if anyone read the blog from Gartner. It was probably like 2 weeks ago, but it was more in context of the agentic AI journey, and they're saying that it's been so volatile that they're expecting it to actually slow down by 2027, and most of the companies actually aborting most of their projects on their agentic AI journey, which was kind of very difficult for me to digest in terms of where really things are moving. And it's not about moving fast, but it's about moving slowly and taking really informed decisions piecemeal by piecemeal to ensure the success part of it, right? So at least for me personally, it was like, I don't think that's going to happen. I was just curious if anyone would have read across or came.
It's just the one where the headline was a clickbait headline, but it's like 40% of AI agent projects will be abandoned in 12 months.
Yes. Yeah. 2027.
Others have thoughts on it or agree, disagree? I think most of those are pilots.
Well, Gartner's basic tack, which works, is they just say everything is dumb and won't work and go slower.
Right. That's right.
And they're right most of the time. So it's a pretty high probability trade for them. But yeah, I've seen things like that. I haven't seen that particular one, but I think that's a big mistake. And I think this time Gartner's been pretty flat-footed. And John's been saying this forever, and I totally agree. You need to move faster than you're comfortable with. This is going way faster than most transitions do. And yes, you want to be thoughtful. Yes, you don't want to shoot yourself in the foot. But that's not, Adam's comment about how slow his company, how difficult it is, that's going to hurt companies this time around a lot. I think a lot more than usual.
Good. Shantanu, did you have a question or?
No, I was just sharing thoughts on that. Like basically, technology broadly is deflationary, and it is AI specifically is significantly deflationary. So it will get to a lot more accelerant, and there will be, to Gartner report's point, right? Like there will be some type of disillusionment, right? Like so, there will be many companies which may not go as much of traction, but that's the creative destruction. We all are well familiar with, be it AI, be it now agents and so forth. I'm very interested in like how the newer agentic infrastructure, especially with offline LLMs, that's going to shake up. So let's see. Yeah, that's some space which is still being, there are very few applications which are being developed currently, but that's the way that technology is.
Accelerate shadow IT, I'll tell you that. Go ahead, John, and then Christina. Go ahead, John.
You're on mute.
Yeah, I'll throw a thing. Just Gartner can be dangerous. The hype cycle is completely the wrong way to think about any problem. And I'll put a post in about I put up a while ago about why the hype cycle is a dangerous idea. Because what it basically allows you to do is to wait until things are too late, and have justification for doing nothing. The fundamental thing here, I think, is that this is a capability which needs to be grown. You can't buy a capability and insert it. It has to be grown. And the reason that is that this is fundamentally a learning system, a new learning system that has humans, machines, and business and the corporation all learning in a new cycle. And we've never had a learning system like this. And it's as big a breakthrough in learning, I think, as the creation of the scientific method was in the Royal Academy back with Newton and so forth, the 1600s. And then the next big leap for me was scientific management with Frederick Taylor, where you studied work to put it into management. And this is the third. This is version 3 of that, and this is a completely different dynamic. And if you wait, the problem is, if you wait on a learning capability, it's hard to catch up because you need a combination of volume and time to learn.
Yeah. John, are you able to catch up?
I wouldn't say you can't, but you have to come up with clever ways to compress organizational learning. And I mean, I think there are some examples. For example, in World War II, the United States had no elite soldiers and nobody who could fight in the mountains. And they looked and they thought that, the Germans might land and divide the United States by coming into the Rocky Mountains. And, they're the first ones to really have, Alpine troops. And the US, through a concerted effort, was able to create Alpine troops that were pretty good, could hang in there with the Germans. So if you really focus on it and have a big budget, maybe, but for most organizations, no.
Thanks. Go ahead, Christina.
Yeah, I really completely agree with John's view about it being an unlock for a new kind of learning organization. But even at the individual level, you asked about things that we've done recently or seen recently that surprised us. I had ChatGPT help me create a script for grabbing articles off the internet and so forth and creating a curated list. I don't code, so it had to teach me not only how to code in Python, but how to set up Google Console, how to create the right permissions to be able to use the APIs correctly. It had to teach me how to do probably 12 things I had never done before. And just by going through systematically following every instruction that it gave me, and even when I made mistakes, like I didn't understand the indentation, it could look and figure out what I had done wrong and tell me how to not just fix it, but why it was a problem. It was a really interesting experience. So in the course of 8 hours, I went from never having done any of those things before to now having rudimentary skills of being able to do those things. And that's a remarkable accomplishment, I think, for a tool to be able to teach me how to do those things. So just thought you'd enjoy that story.
It was wonderful. Thank you, Christina. I think that's happening thousands of times all over companies and high schools and everywhere. So let's finish up with that. Adam, thank you. Great presentation. Everyone, thanks for coming. Eddie, thanks for joining for the first time, and everyone, other folks, to see you again. We're on for next week, same time, and we'll have Chris Brock, who's going to go through why he loves Lovable so much and an application he way his mind. So join us next week as well. Have a great week, everyone.